The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of the Veterans Affairs office in San Diego as Sarah Martinez adjusted her crisp navy uniform one final time. The gold oak leaves on her collar gleamed in the California sunlight, and the trident pin on her chest caught the attention of every veteran who passed by. At 32, Sarah had perfected the art of commanding respect with just her presence. Her shoulders were squared, her gaze steady, and her handshake firm enough to make seasoned military personnel take notice. Sarah had been living this lie for 3 years now, and it had become as natural as breathing. She walked into the Veterans Affairs building with the confidence of someone who had earned every ribbon and medal adorning her uniform. The receptionist, a young woman named Katie who had been working there for 6 months, immediately stood straighter when she saw Sarah approaching. "Commander Martinez," Katie said with obvious admiration. "The regional director is waiting for you in conference room B. He seemed very excited about your visit today." Sarah nodded with the practiced authority she had developed over countless interactions like this one. "Thank you, Katie. Has the presentation equipment been set up as requested?" "Yes, ma'am. Everything's ready for your briefing on the new veteran transition programs." As Sarah made her way down the familiar hallway, she reflected on how she had reached this point. It hadn't started as a grand deception. 3 years ago, she had been Sarah Collins, a struggling single mother working 2 jobs just to make ends meet. Her ex-husband had left her with mounting debts and a 5-year-old daughter to raise alone. She had tried everything legitimate: community college courses, retail jobs, administrative positions, but nothing paid enough to dig her out of the financial hole she found herself in. The transformation began with a simple lie at a job interview. When asked about her military background, Sarah had mentioned serving in the Navy. It wasn't entirely false. She had completed 2 years of service as a logistics specialist before being discharged due to a medical condition. But when the interviewer assumed she had been an officer, Sarah hadn't corrected him. When he mentioned Navy SEALs with obvious admiration, Sarah had nodded knowingly, allowing him to draw his own conclusions. That first small deception had opened doors she never knew existed. Within weeks, she was hired for a well-paying position with a defense contractor, working with veterans organizations. The respect and opportunities that came with her fabricated military credentials were intoxicating. For the first time in years, Sarah felt powerful and important. The conference room was filled with VA administrators, social workers, and veteran advocates. As Sarah entered, conversations stopped and heads turned. She had learned to read the room quickly, identifying the key players and adjusting her approach accordingly. The regional director, a man named Tom Harrison who had served in the Army during the Gulf War, stood to greet her. "Commander Martinez, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. Your reputation precedes you, and we're honored to have someone with your background helping us improve our services." Sarah smiled warmly, maintaining eye contact as she had practiced countless times. "The honor is mine, Director Harrison. Serving our fellow veterans is not just my duty, it's my passion." Over the next hour, Sarah delivered a presentation about veteran transition programs that she had carefully researched and prepared. She spoke about the challenges facing returning service members, the importance of mental health resources, and innovative approaches to job placement. Her audience hung on every word, occasionally nodding in agreement or taking notes. What made Sarah's deception so effective wasn't just the uniform or the fake credentials she had carefully crafted. It was her genuine passion for helping veterans. During her brief actual military service, she had witnessed firsthand the struggles that service members faced when transitioning to civilian life. Her lies might have been elaborate, but her commitment to the cause was real. After the presentation, Sarah found herself surrounded by attendees eager to ask questions and share their own experiences. She had become skilled at deflecting specific questions about her supposed SEAL training, instead steering conversations toward broader topics about military culture and veteran needs. When someone asked about her combat deployments, she would speak generally about the brotherhood of service and the weight of responsibility that all military personnel carried. During a coffee break, Sarah stepped outside to take a phone call from her daughter's school. Emma was in 2nd grade now, and Sarah had been able to enroll her in a better school district thanks to the increased income from her fraudulent career. As she listened to the teacher praise Emma's academic progress, Sarah felt a familiar pang of guilt mixed with justification. She was providing her daughter with opportunities that would never have been possible on a logistics specialist's military pension and minimum wage jobs. "Mommy, are you coming to my school play tonight?" Emma's voice came through the phone when the teacher handed it to her. "Of course, sweetheart. I wouldn't miss it for the world." I'll be there right after work. Are you wearing your special uniform today? Mrs. Peterson says you're a hero. Sarah's throat tightened. I'm wearing it, baby. I'll see you tonight, okay? I love you. I love you too, Mommy. As Sarah ended the call, she noticed a man watching her from across the parking lot. He was older, probably in his 60s, with gray hair and the unmistakable bearing of a career military officer. He wasn't part of the VA conference, and something about the way he was observing her made Sarah uncomfortable. She made a mental note to keep an eye out for him as she returned to the building. The afternoon session focused on collaborative efforts between various veteran service organizations. Sarah found herself seated next to a woman named Dr. Patricia Wells, a psychologist who specialized in treating PTSD in former Special Operations personnel. Dr. Wells had been working with Navy SEALs for over a decade, and her knowledge of the community was extensive. Commander Martinez, Dr. Wells said during another break, I'd love to get your perspective on some of the challenges I'm seeing with SEAL veterans. The transition from such an elite unit to civilian life seems particularly difficult. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but maintained her composure. It's definitely a unique situation. The brotherhood in the teams is unlike anything else in the military. When that structure is suddenly gone, it can leave a significant void. Dr. Wells nodded thoughtfully. Exactly. I'm curious about your own transition experience. Which team were you with? This was the type of specific question Sarah dreaded. I prefer not to go into operational details, she replied smoothly. I'm sure you understand the sensitivity around some aspects of special operations work. Of course, Dr. Wells said, though Sarah detected a slight change in her tone. I completely respect that. I've just found that sharing experiences, even in general terms, can be incredibly helpful for the veterans I work with. The conversation was interrupted by the return of the main session, but Sarah noticed Dr. Wells glancing at her several times throughout the remainder of the afternoon. She made another mental note to be more cautious around people with extensive knowledge of the SEAL community. As the conference concluded, Sarah exchanged business cards and contact information with several attendees. She had become skilled at networking, building a web of professional relationships that supported and reinforced her false identity. Many of the people she worked with had become genuine friends, which made her deception feel even more complicated. Walking to her car, Sarah noticed the same older man from earlier standing near the entrance to the building. This time, he approached her directly. Excuse me, Commander Martinez? His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Sarah turned to face him, her training in deception automatically engaging. Yes, I'm Admiral Robert Chun, retired. I wanted to introduce myself. I've been hearing quite a bit about your work in the veteran community. Sarah's blood ran cold, but she extended her hand with practiced confidence. Admiral Chun, it's an honor to meet you, sir. The honor is mine, Commander. I have to say, it's refreshing to see a SEAL officer so dedicated to post-service advocacy. Which BUD/S class were you in? The question hung in the air like a challenge. BUD/S, Basic Underwater Demolition/SEAL, was the infamous training program that all Navy SEALs completed. Sarah had researched it extensively, but Admiral Chin's direct question suggested he had specific knowledge that could expose her. Class 250, sir, Sarah replied, choosing a number from her research that she believed would be appropriately recent but not too easily verified on the spot. Admiral Chin's expression remained neutral, but Sarah sensed he was processing her answer carefully. Interesting. And your platoon assignments after that? I'm sure you understand, sir, that some operational details need to remain classified, especially in a public setting like this. The Admiral smiled slightly. Of course. Well, Commander, I hope we'll have the opportunity to speak more in the future. I'm always interested in connecting with fellow warriors who are making a difference in the veteran community. As Admiral Chin walked away, Sarah felt her hands trembling slightly. She got into her car and sat for several minutes, trying to calm her racing heart. The encounter had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. For 3 years, she had been able to navigate questions and challenges through careful preparation and general knowledge. But meeting an actual admiral who clearly had extensive knowledge of the SEAL community was a new level of risk. Driving home through San Diego traffic, Sarah's mind raced through possible scenarios. Had Admiral Chin suspected something? Was he testing her knowledge? She had handled similar situations before, but something about this interaction felt different, more dangerous. Her apartment was in a middle-class neighborhood that she could afford thanks to her fraudulent career. As she changed out of her uniform and into civilian clothes, Sarah caught sight of herself in the bedroom mirror. For a moment, she saw herself clearly. not as Commander Martinez, the decorated SEAL officer, but as Sarah Collins, the woman who had created an elaborate lie to escape poverty and provide for her daughter. Emma came running when she heard the front door open, her backpack bouncing as she launched herself into Sarah's arms. "Mommy, you're home. Are you ready for my play? I'm playing a tree in the forest scene." Sarah held her daughter tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I can't wait to see you, sweetheart. Let me just change clothes, and we'll go." As Emma chattered about her day at school and the excitement of the upcoming performance, Sarah made dinner and tried to push thoughts of Admiral Chen out of her mind. This was why she did what she did. Emma was thriving in ways that never would have been possible before. She was in a good school, had health insurance, lived in a safe neighborhood, and had opportunities that Sarah had only dreamed of as a child. The school auditorium was packed with parents and family members, all eager to watch their children perform. Sarah found a seat near the middle and watched as Emma appeared on stage, her arms stretched out like branches, swaying gently as the narrator told a story about forest conservation. Sarah's heart swelled with pride, but underneath the joy was a constant current of anxiety about her double life. After the performance, several other parents approached Sarah. Word had spread in the school community that Emma's mother was a decorated Navy officer, and people were always eager to thank her for her service or ask questions about military life. Sarah had learned to handle these interactions gracefully, always expressing humility and redirecting conversations toward more general topics. "Mrs. Martinez," said another mother named Jennifer whose son was in Emma's class, "my brother is thinking about joining the Navy. Would you be willing to talk to him sometime about what military service is really like?" "I'd be happy to help," Sarah replied automatically, though each of these requests added another layer of complexity to her deception. "Have him call me, and we can set up a time to chat." Driving home after the play, with Emma asleep in the back seat, Sarah reflected on the strange duality of her existence. During the day, she was Commander Martinez, respected and admired for achievements she had never actually accomplished. In the evening, she was just a single mom helping with homework, making dinner, and reading bedtime stories. Both versions of herself felt real in their own way, which made the deception both easier and more emotionally complicated. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat at her laptop researching Admiral Robert Chen. She found several articles about his distinguished career, including his role in overseeing special operations during the Iraq War. His biography mentioned extensive experience working with SEAL teams, which confirmed Sarah's worst fears about their encounter. This was not someone she could fool with surface-level knowledge and general military terminology. Sarah also researched Class 250 of BUD/S training, the number she had given Admiral Chen earlier. To her relief, she found that it was a real class that had graduated several years ago, which meant her answer hadn't been obviously fabricated. However, she also realized that someone with Admiral Chen's connections could easily verify whether there had been any female graduates in that class, and she suspected the answer would not support her story. As Sarah prepared for bed, she made a decision that had been building for weeks. She needed to be more careful about which events she attended and which people she interacted with. The veteran advocacy work was fulfilling and financially rewarding, but encounters like today's reminded her how precarious her situation really was. One person with the right knowledge and connections could bring everything crashing down. But even as she resolved to be more cautious, Sarah knew she wasn't ready to give up the life she had built. Emma was happy and thriving. Sarah was making a difference in the veteran community, and they had financial security for the first time in years. The risks were real, but so were the benefits of her deception. Little did Sarah know that Admiral Chen had already begun making phone calls, and her carefully constructed world was about to face its greatest challenge yet. The next few days would test every skill she had developed in maintaining her false identity, and the stakes were about to become much higher than she had ever imagined. The foundation of lies that had supported Sarah's new life for 3 years was beginning to show cracks, but she had no idea how quickly everything would unravel. Her encounter with Admiral Chen was just the beginning of a chain of events that would ultimately lead to her arrest, and a confrontation with the truth she had been running from for so long. As Sarah finally drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of Emma's proud smile during the school play. Whatever happened next, she told herself, it had all been worth it to give her daughter a better life. But, deep down, she knew that justification was becoming harder and harder to maintain as the web of her deception grew more complex, and the potential consequences more severe. The clock on her nightstand read 11:47 p.m. as Sarah finally fell asleep, unaware that Admiral Chun was still awake across town, making calls to contacts who might be able to help him verify the background of the woman who claimed to be Commander Martinez. The wheels of investigation were already in motion, though it would be days before Sarah realized just how much trouble she was really in. 3 days after the Veterans Affairs Conference, Sarah was beginning to think she had worried unnecessarily about her encounter with Admiral Chun. She hadn't heard anything unusual, and her regular work routine continued without interruption. On Thursday morning, she was scheduled to speak at a corporate event for a tech company that wanted to improve their veteran hiring practices. It was the kind of engagement that paid well and allowed her to genuinely help former service members find meaningful employment. Sarah arrived at the gleaming glass offices of Tech Forward Solutions in downtown San Diego wearing her dress blue uniform with all the ribbons and medals she had carefully acquired over the past 3 years. The company's HR director, Mark Stevens, greeted her warmly in the lobby. Mark was an Army veteran himself, having served as a helicopter pilot during peacekeeping operations in the Balkans. "Commander Martinez, thank you so much for coming today. Our leadership team is really excited to hear your perspective on veteran integration in the tech sector." As they rode the elevator to the 20th floor, Mark chatted about his own military experience and the challenges he'd faced transitioning to corporate life. Sarah found these conversations both rewarding and nerve-wracking. She genuinely enjoyed helping fellow veterans, but every interaction was also a potential minefield where one wrong detail could expose her deception. The conference room was filled with about 30 people, including senior executives, HR managers, and team leaders. Sarah had delivered similar presentations dozens of times, and she felt confident as she began speaking about the unique skills that military personnel brought to civilian workplaces: leadership under pressure, attention to detail, ability to work in diverse teams, and dedication to mission accomplishment. "Veterans don't just bring technical skills to your organization," Sarah explained, clicking through her professionally prepared slides. "They bring a mindset that can transform your entire corporate culture. When you hire a veteran, you're not just filling a position, you're adding someone who understands that the mission comes before personal comfort." The audience was engaged, asking thoughtful questions about resume translation, addressing potential PTSD concerns, and creating mentorship programs. Sarah felt in her element, drawing on her genuine passion for veteran advocacy while carefully avoiding specific details about combat operations or classified missions. During the lunch break, several executives approached Sarah individually. The CEO, a woman named Lisa Park, was particularly interested in establishing a formal partnership with veteran organizations. "Commander, we'd love to have you consult with us on developing a comprehensive veteran hiring initiative. Your insights could really help us build something meaningful rather than just checking boxes for corporate social responsibility." Sarah was about to respond when her phone buzzed with a text message. The number wasn't in her contacts, but the message made her blood run cold. "We need to meet. Today, 3 p.m. at Balboa Park, near the Veterans Memorial. Come alone. R. Chun." She maintained her composure as she finished the conversation with Lisa Park, but her mind was racing. Admiral Chun wanting to meet privately could only mean one thing. He had discovered something about her background that he wanted to discuss away from public view. Sarah excused herself to use the restroom, where she could think clearly about her options. She could ignore the message and hope Admiral Chun would simply go away. She could leave town immediately, abandoning the life she had built in San Diego, or she could meet with him and try to maintain her deception through whatever knowledge he had uncovered. None of the options seemed particularly appealing, but running would mean giving up everything she had worked for and leaving Emma's life in chaos. Sarah decided to keep her afternoon appointment with the Admiral. She had talked her way out of difficult situations before, and maybe she could do it again. Besides, he might only have suspicions rather than concrete proof of her deception. The rest of the corporate presentation went well, but Sarah found it difficult to concentrate fully. She kept checking her phone, wondering what Admiral Chin knew and how he had obtained her personal number. When the event concluded at 2:15 p.m., Sarah drove directly to Balboa Park, arriving 15 minutes early to scout the meeting location and prepare mentally for whatever was coming. The Veterans Memorial in Balboa Park was a somber granite structure surrounded by carefully maintained gardens. It was a fitting location for what Sarah suspected would be a confrontational conversation. She found Admiral Chen already there, standing before the memorial wall reading the names of local service members who had been killed in action. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt and khakis, but his military bearing was unmistakable. "Commander Martinez," he said without turning around when Sarah approached. "Thank you for coming. Admiral Chun, I have to say, your text message was rather mysterious." The Admiral finally turned to face her, and Sarah could see that his expression was serious but not hostile. "I apologize for the dramatic approach, but I felt it was important to speak with you privately before taking any further action." Sarah's heart was pounding, but she maintained her calm exterior. "Further action regarding what, sir?" "I think you know, Commander. Or should I say, Miss Collins?" The use of her real name hit Sarah like a physical blow, but she managed not to react visibly. "I'm sorry, Admiral, but I'm not sure what you're referring to." Admiral Chen reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a manila folder. "I have here the complete service record of Sarah Elizabeth Collins, who served as a logistics specialist 3rd class in the United States Navy from 2018 to 2020. She was medically discharged due to complications from a knee injury sustained during training. At no point did she attend BUD/S training, serve with a SEAL team, or hold the rank of commander." The game was up, but Sarah's mind was still racing through possible escape routes. "Admiral, I think there's been some confusion, Ms. Collins," Admiral Chun interrupted gently but firmly. "I've also spoken with Dr. Patricia Wells from the conference the other day. She became concerned about some inconsistencies in your knowledge of SEAL operations and asked me to look into your background. It took my contacts at Naval Personnel Command exactly 47 minutes to determine that there has never been a female SEAL officer named Martinez, and that no women have ever graduated from BUD/S Class 250. Sarah felt her carefully constructed world crumbling around her, but she wasn't ready to surrender completely. "Even if what you're saying is true, what exactly are you planning to do about it?" Admiral Chen sat down on a nearby bench and gestured for Sarah to join him. "That depends on you, Ms. Collins. I'm not interested in destroying your life, but what you're doing is a serious federal crime. Impersonating a military officer, falsely claiming medals and honors, fraudulently representing yourself to obtain employment and benefits. These charges could result in significant prison time." Sarah sat down slowly, feeling the weight of 3 years of deception finally catching up with her. "What do you want from me?" "I want to understand why you did this. I've been asking around about your work in the veteran community, and everyone speaks very highly of you. The advocacy work you've been doing is genuine and valuable. Dr. Wells tells me you've helped connect dozens of veterans with mental health resources and job opportunities. That doesn't sound like someone who's simply trying to con people." For the first time in years, Sarah felt the urge to tell the complete truth to someone. The burden of maintaining her false identity had been exhausting, and Admiral Chen's unexpected compassion made her defenses crumble. "I have a daughter," Sarah began quietly. "When my ex-husband left, he cleaned out our bank accounts and left me with enormous credit card debt. I was working 2 minimum wage jobs and still couldn't make ends meet. Emma was starting school, and I wanted her to have opportunities one never had growing up." Admiral Chen listened without interruption as Sarah continued. "It started small. At a job interview, they assumed I had been an officer because I mentioned my Navy service. When they seemed impressed, I didn't correct them. Then, someone mentioned SEALs with such respect and admiration, and I just let them think what they wanted to think. And it escalated from there," Admiral Chun said, not as a question but as an understanding. "Every lie required another lie to support it. I had to create fake documentation, study military procedures I never learned, memorize details about operations I never participated in. But the work itself, helping veterans, that part was real. I genuinely care about these people and the challenges they face." Sarah wiped away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I know there's no excuse for what I did. I know I've dishonored the service and sacrificed the trust of people who believed in me. But my daughter is thriving now. She's in a good school, we live in a safe neighborhood, and for the first time in her life, she has stability." Admiral Chun was quiet for several minutes, watching families walk through the park and veterans visiting the memorial. Finally, he spoke. "Miss Collins, what you've done is indeed serious. But I've seen enough in my 40-year career to recognize the difference between malicious fraud and desperate circumstances that led to poor decisions." Sarah looked up hopefully, unsure what to expect next. "I'm going to make you a proposition," Admiral Chen continued. "You're going to come clean about your deception, but You're going to do it in a way that might allow you to salvage something positive from this situation. What do you mean? Tomorrow, you're going to call the regional VA director and request a private meeting. You're going to tell him the truth about your background and resign from all your positions immediately. You're also going to contact every organization you've worked with and admit that you misrepresented your military service. Sarah's heart sank. That will destroy everything. I'll lose my job, my income, my reputation. Emma, and I will be right back where we started. Not necessarily, Admiral Chen said. Here's what else you're going to do. You're going to propose establishing a new program, one that focuses on helping veterans who are struggling with similar financial and personal challenges that led to your own poor decisions. You know better than most what it's like to feel trapped by circumstances and make desperate choices. Sarah stared at him, not sure she had heard correctly. You want me to turn my fraud into a job opportunity? I want you to turn your experience, both the legitimate advocacy work you've done and the desperate circumstances that led to your deception, into something that can help other veterans before they make similar mistakes. You understand financial stress, single parenthood, the pressure to provide for your family. Those are real issues that affect many veterans. Admiral Chen pulled out a business card and handed it to Sarah. I have connections throughout the veteran services community. If you handle this situation with complete honesty and genuine commitment to making amends, I can help you find legitimate work in veteran advocacy. It won't pay as much as your fraudulent career has, but it will be honest work that builds on the genuine skills you've developed. Sarah studied the card, which showed Admiral Chen's contact information for a veteran transition consulting firm. Why would you help me after what I've done? Because I believe in second chances for people who earn them. Because the veteran community is about taking care of each other, even when we make mistakes. And because throwing you in prison would punish your daughter for your poor choices, which doesn't serve anyone's interests. They sat in silence for several more minutes before Admiral Chen continued. But understand this, Ms. Collins, this is a one-time offer. If you try to continue the deception, or if you don't follow through completely on coming clean, I will personally ensure that federal authorities prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law. Sarah nodded slowly. I understand, Admiral. And I'm grateful for this chance. I know I don't deserve it. We all deserve the opportunity to make things right when we've made mistakes, Admiral Chen replied. The question is whether we have the courage to take advantage of that opportunity. As they prepared to part ways, Admiral Chen gave Sarah one final piece of advice. When you tell your story, focus on the truth, both the circumstances that led to your deception and the genuine passion for helping veterans that motivated your work. People can forgive mistakes, especially when they understand the human circumstances behind them. But they can't forgive continued dishonesty. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment staring at her laptop screen, trying to compose the first of what would be many difficult phone calls and emails. Emma was doing homework at the kitchen table, occasionally asking for help with math problems. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal given the enormity of what Sarah was about to do. Mommy, Emma said during a break from her homework, are you okay? You seem sad today. Sarah knelt down beside her daughter's chair and brushed a strand of hair from Emma's face. I'm okay, sweetheart. But Mommy might have some changes coming at work. We might need to move to a smaller apartment and change some things about our life. Emma's expression grew concerned. Are we going to be poor again? The question broke Sarah's heart, both because it showed how much Emma remembered from their previous struggles and because it revealed how much Sarah's deception had been motivated by wanting to protect her daughter from financial insecurity. We might have less money for a while, Sarah said honestly. But we'll be okay. We have each other, and that's what matters most. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah finally began writing the emails that would end her 3-year career as Commander Martinez. She started with the VA regional director, explaining that she needed to meet urgently about a serious personal matter that affected her work with the organization. Each email was difficult to compose, but Sarah found that telling the truth felt lighter somehow than maintaining her elaborate deception had. For the first time in 3 years, she wouldn't have to remember which version of her story she had told to which person. She wouldn't have to research military details she had supposedly lived through or worry about running into someone who might expose her lies. As she worked on the emails, Sarah reflected on Admiral Chen's unexpected compassion. She had expected him to immediately contact authorities and have her arrested. Instead, he had offered her a path toward redemption that acknowledged both her crimes and her genuine contributions to the veteran community. It was more than she deserved, but she was determined to prove worthy of his faith in her. The next morning would mark the beginning of the most difficult period of Sarah's adult life. She would have to face the people she had deceived, accept the consequences of her actions, and rebuild her career and reputation from scratch. But, for the first time in years, she would be doing it honestly, and that felt like a kind of freedom she had forgotten existed. Sarah sent the last email at 2:30 a.m. and, finally, went to bed, knowing that her old life as Commander Martinez was over. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of reclaiming her identity as Sarah Collins, flawed, struggling, but, finally, ready to face the truth about who she really was and what she had done. The road ahead would be difficult, but at least it would be honest. The Veterans Affairs Regional Office felt different when Sarah walked through the doors on Friday morning. The same receptionist, Katie, greeted her with the usual respectful smile, but Sarah felt like she was seeing everything through new eyes. In a few hours, Katie would know the truth about Commander Martinez, and that respectful smile would likely turn to confusion, disappointment, or worse. Sarah had barely slept after sending her emails the night before. She had requested urgent meetings with Director Harrison and 2 other key administrators, explaining only that she needed to discuss a serious personal matter that affected her work with the organization. All 3 had responded quickly, agreeing to meet with her first thing in the morning. Director Harrison was waiting in his office when Sarah arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. He stood to greet her with his usual warm handshake, but Sarah could see concern in his eyes. "Commander Martinez, your email last night had me worried. Is everything all right? Are you dealing with some kind of medical issue?" Sarah had rehearsed this conversation dozens of times in her mind, but actually beginning felt almost impossible. "Director Harrison, thank you for seeing me so quickly. What I need to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear, and I want you to know that I understand the serious consequences of what I'm about to reveal." Tom Harrison's expression grew more concerned as he gestured for Sarah to sit down. "You're making me nervous, Commander. Whatever it is, we can work through it together." "That's just it, sir. I'm not actually a commander. I'm not a SEAL officer. My real name is Sarah Collins, and I'm a former logistics specialist who was medically discharged after 2 years of service." The words tumbled out quickly, like a dam bursting after years of pressure. Director Harrison stared at Sarah for a long moment, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and, finally, a kind of stunned recognition. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Sarah took a deep breath and continued. "For the past 3 years, I've been fraudulently representing myself as a Navy SEAL commander. I created false documentation, fabricated my service record, and obtained positions and speaking engagements under completely false pretenses. The work I've done with veterans has been genuine, but my credentials and background are entirely fabricated." The office fell completely silent except for the sound of Tom Harrison's coffee mug being set down heavily on his desk. Sarah could hear voices from the hallway outside and the distant sound of phones ringing, but inside the office, the silence stretched on for what felt like hours. "My God," Director Harrison finally said. "Sarah, Miss Collins, I don't even know what to call you. Do you have any idea what you've done? The trust you violated? The damage this could cause to our organization?" "Yes, sir. I understand completely, and I take full responsibility for my actions. I'm prepared to resign immediately from all positions and consulting arrangements. I'll cooperate fully with any investigation, and I'll work to minimize the damage to the organizations I've deceived." Tom Harrison stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the parking lot where they had first met 3 years ago. How did you possibly think you could maintain something like this? We've had you speak to congressional staffers, defense contractors, military leadership. You've been quoted in newspapers and featured in veterans publications." Sarah felt sick thinking about the scope of her deception. It started small, and each lie required another lie to support it. "I studied extensively, memorized details, created a false identity that became more elaborate over time. I knew it was wrong, but the opportunities it created for helping veterans it felt like I was doing important work." "Important work built on a foundation of lies," Director Harrison said, his voice growing harder. "Do you understand that this could undermine every program you've been involved with? That people might question the credibility of legitimate veterans because of what you've done?" "I do understand that, sir, and it's the part of this that I regret most deeply. The veterans I've worked with deserve better than to have their advocacy contaminated by my deception." Director Harrison turned back to face Sarah, and she could see he was struggling with emotions beyond just anger. "Sarah, I've worked with you closely for 3 years. The passion you showed for veterans' issues, the knowledge you demonstrated about their challenges, the genuine care you expressed for their well-being. Was any of that real? All of that was real, Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. My service record was false, but my commitment to helping veterans was completely genuine. I did serve, just not in the capacity I claimed. I know what it's like to struggle with the transition to civilian life, to face financial challenges, to feel lost and desperate. Those experiences were real, even if I misrepresented how I acquired them. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Director Harrison's assistant informed him that the other administrators had arrived for the meeting Sarah had requested. Within minutes, Sarah found herself sitting across from three people who had trusted and respected her for years, preparing to shatter that trust completely. The process of confessing to each group became slightly easier as the morning progressed, though no less painful. Sarah told the complete truth about her background, her motivations, and the scope of her deception. She answered every question honestly, provided documentation about her real service record, and explained how she had created and maintained her false identity. The reactions varied among the different administrators and staff members. Some were primarily angry about the fraud and its potential impact on their organizations. Others seemed more hurt by the personal betrayal, having considered Commander Martinez a friend and colleague. A few expressed concern about Sarah's circumstances and what had driven her to such desperate measures. By noon, word was beginning to spread through the Veterans Services community in San Diego. Sarah had contacted the major organizations she had worked with, and several had immediately begun internal reviews of any programs or initiatives she had been involved with. The phone in Director Harrison's office rang constantly as other organizations called seeking information or clarification. Sarah's phone was also ringing continuously with calls from reporters who had somehow gotten wind of the story. News of a fake SEAL officer being exposed traveled fast through military and veteran networks, and several journalists were already working on articles about the scandal. Around 2 p.m., as Sarah was meeting with a VA attorney about the legal implications of her deception, her phone rang with a call from Admiral Chun. She stepped into the hallway to take the call. "Miss Collins, I've been hearing through various channels that you've begun the process of coming clean about your background." "Yes, Admiral. I've met with the major organizations I've worked with, and I'm cooperating fully with their internal investigations. I've also spoken with a VA attorney about potential legal consequences. How are people responding?" Sarah leaned against the wall, feeling emotionally and physically exhausted. "About as you'd expect. Anger, disappointment, concern about the damage to their organizations. Several people have been kind enough to acknowledge the positive work I've done, but I don't think that outweighs the damage I've caused." "Have any organizations contacted law enforcement yet?" "Not that I'm aware of, but the day isn't over." The VA attorney mentioned that they're required to report potential fraud to federal authorities, so I expect that's coming soon. Admiral Chun was quiet for a moment. "Miss Collins, I want you to know that I've been making some calls on your behalf. I've spoken with several people in the Veteran Services community about the situation, focusing on the genuine advocacy work you've done and the circumstances that led to your poor decisions." Sarah was surprised. "Admiral, you don't need to do that. I created this situation, and I need to face the consequences." "You do need to face consequences," Admiral Chin agreed. "But I believe those consequences should be proportionate and should take into account both the harm you've caused and the good you've accomplished. I've been in contact with a federal prosecutor who specializes in military-related cases, and I've explained the situation to him." "What did he say?" "He's agreed to meet with you before deciding whether to pursue charges. He's interested in understanding your motivations and hearing about the genuine veteran advocacy work you've been doing. No promises, but he seemed open to considering alternatives to traditional prosecution." Sarah felt a mix of relief and continued anxiety. "I appreciate your help, Admiral, more than I can express. But I want to make sure you understand that I'm not looking for special treatment or trying to avoid responsibility for what I've done. I know that, Ms. Collins. But there's a difference between accountability and destruction. If we can find a path forward that holds you accountable while preserving your ability to do legitimate good work in the veteran community, that serves everyone's interests better than simply throwing you in prison." After ending the call with Admiral Chun, Sarah returned to the conference room where the VA administrators were discussing the immediate steps they needed to take to address her deception. They had decided to immediately suspend all programs she had been involved with pending a complete review, and they were drafting statements to send to partner organizations and congressional contacts. Ms. Collins, Director Harrison said when she rejoined the meeting, "We've been discussing next steps. Obviously, your consulting contracts are terminated immediately, and we'll need you to return any VA property or materials you have. But we're also concerned about the broader impact on veteran services in this region." Sarah nodded. "I understand completely. What can I do to minimize the damage?" "We're going to need you to contact every veteran organization, contractor, and government office you've worked with and provide them with a written statement explaining the situation. We'll also need you to participate in any investigations or reviews they conduct." Over the next several hours, Sarah worked with the VA staff to compile a comprehensive list of every organization, individual, and program she had been involved with during her 3 years as Commander Martinez. The scope was staggering. Dozens of organizations, hundreds of individual veterans she had counseled or assisted, multiple government contracts, and numerous public speaking engagements. Each contact would require a personal phone call followed by a written explanation and formal apology. Many would likely result in internal investigations, terminated contracts, and damaged relationships between organizations that had worked together based on Sarah's false recommendations. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah began to understand the full magnitude of the consequences her deception would have on the entire veteran services community in San Diego. It wasn't just her own life that would be disrupted. Programs that helped thousands of veterans could be delayed, defunded, or canceled entirely because of questions about their association with a fraudulent officer. Around 4 p.m., Sarah was finally able to leave the VA office and drive home to pick up Emma from school. She had been dreading this moment all day, knowing that she would soon have to explain to her 8-year-old daughter that their life was about to change dramatically. Emma was excited about a field trip her class had planned for the following week, chattering about the science museum they would visit and the exhibits she wanted to see. Sarah listened with a heavy heart, knowing that by next week, they might not be able to afford the small fees associated with school activities. "Mommy, you look really tired. Was work hard today?" Sarah glanced at her daughter in the rearview mirror, trying to find age-appropriate words to explain what was happening. "Yes, sweetheart. Mommy had to have some difficult conversations at work today. We might need to talk about some changes in our family soon." "What kind of changes?" "Well, I might need to find a new job, which could mean less money for a while. We might need to move to a smaller apartment, and some things might be different." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the seriousness that children often bring to adult problems. "Are we going to be okay?" "Yes, baby. We're going to be okay. It might be harder for a while, but we'll take care of each other, and we'll figure it out together." That evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and began the enormous task of contacting everyone she had deceived over the past 3 years. Each email and phone call was emotionally draining, requiring her to relive the shame of her deception while trying to provide useful information to help organizations address the fallout. Some conversations went better than others. Dr. Patricia Wells, the psychologist who had originally become suspicious, was surprisingly understanding when Sarah called to apologize personally. "Sarah, I appreciate you calling me directly. I have to ask, the passion you showed for helping SEAL veterans with PTSD, was that genuine?" "Completely genuine, Dr. Wells. I may not have served with the teams, but I've worked with enough veterans to understand the unique challenges they face. My methods were wrong, but my commitment to helping was real. I believed that when I met you, and I still believe it now. What you did was wrong, but I've seen the impact of your advocacy work, and that was valuable regardless of your background." Other conversations were much more difficult. Mark Stevens from Tech Forward Solutions was particularly hurt by the deception. "Sarah, we trusted you completely. We were planning to structure our entire veteran hiring initiative around your recommendations. Now we don't know what to believe or how to move forward. Mark, I understand your anger, and I know my apology doesn't fix the damage I've caused. But the recommendations I made about veteran hiring were based on legitimate research and genuine understanding of the challenges veterans face in corporate environments. The source of that knowledge was misrepresented, but the knowledge itself was valid. How can we possibly know that? How can we trust anything you told us?" It was a fair question, and one that Sarah couldn't answer satisfactorily. The trust she had violated would be nearly impossible to rebuild, and the organizations she had worked with would have to start over with their veteran initiatives, delaying help for the people who needed it most. As the evening progressed, Sarah began receiving calls from journalists who had learned about the story. She declined all interviews, following the advice of the VA attorney who had warned her that anything she said publicly could potentially be used against her in legal proceedings. By midnight, Sarah had contacted most of the major organizations she had worked with, and the responses ranged from anger to disappointment to concern for her well-being. Several expressed worry about the impact on her daughter, and a few even offered to help her find legitimate work in the veteran services community despite her deception. The next few days would bring more difficult conversations, meetings with federal investigators, and the beginning of what would likely be a long legal process. But as Sarah finally went to bed after one of the most emotionally exhausting days of her life, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years, the relief of telling the truth. Whatever consequences awaited her, she would face them honestly, without the burden of maintaining an elaborate lie or the constant fear of being discovered. For the first time since she had created the false identity of Commander Martinez, Sarah Collins was ready to face the world as herself, flawed, struggling, but, finally, truthful about who she really was and what she had done. Monday morning brought the sound Sarah had been dreading since Admiral Chun first confronted her, a firm knock on her apartment door at 6:47 a.m. Through the peephole, she could see 2 men in dark suits, one holding a badge, the other carrying a briefcase. Emma was still asleep, and Sarah hoped to keep it that way for at least a few more minutes. Special Agent Michael Rodriguez of the FBI introduced himself and his partner, Agent Jennifer Liu, with professional courtesy but unmistakable authority. Ms. Collins, we're here regarding allegations of military impersonation and fraud. We have a warrant for your arrest. Sarah had been expecting this moment since her confession on Friday, but hearing the actual words still felt like a physical blow. I understand, agents. My daughter is still sleeping. Can I wake her up and arrange for someone to take care of her before we go? Agent Rodriguez consulted his watch. You have 10 minutes to make arrangements. Agent Liu will accompany you. Sarah's hands were shaking as she dialed her neighbor Mrs. Patterson, an elderly retired teacher who had become like a grandmother to Emma over the past 2 years. Mrs. Patterson had been one of the people most impressed by Sarah's supposed military service, often introducing her to friends as the Navy hero who lives next door. Mrs. Patterson, I'm so sorry to call this early, but I have an emergency. I need to go somewhere urgently, and I was wondering if Emma could stay with you today. I'll explain everything later. Of course, dear. Is everything all right? You sound upset. I'll call you later today and explain. Thank you so much for helping with Emma. Waking Emma was one of the hardest things Sarah had ever had to do. Her daughter was confused about why she needed to go to Mrs. Patterson's house so early and why Mommy couldn't drive her to school as usual. Mommy, why are those men in our living room? Are they friends of yours? Sarah knelt down to Emma's eye level, trying to find words that wouldn't terrify an 8-year-old. They're here because Mommy made some mistakes at work, and I need to go with them to fix things. Mrs. Patterson is going to take care of you today, and I'll call you tonight. Are you in trouble? The question cut straight through Sarah's heart. Yes, sweetheart. I am in trouble, but I'm going to work very hard to fix it, okay? And no matter what happens, I love you more than anything in the world. Emma hugged her tightly, and Sarah had to fight back tears as she kissed her daughter goodbye and watched Mrs. Patterson lead her away. The last thing Emma said before the door closed was, "Come home soon, Mommy." The federal courthouse in downtown San Diego was imposing and cold, filled with the controlled chaos of lawyers, defendants, and law enforcement officers moving through various stages of the justice system. Sarah was processed through booking with the efficient detachment of a system that handled hundreds of cases every month. Fingerprints, photographs, paperwork, and forms that reduced her 3 years of deception to a series of boxes to be checked and charges to be filed. The initial appearance before Magistrate Judge Patricia Hernandez was brief and procedural. Sarah learned that she was being charged with multiple federal crimes: fraudulent enlistment, unauthorized wearing of military decorations, mail fraud related to her false employment applications, and wire fraud for electronic communications made in furtherance of her scheme. The prosecutor, Assistant United States Attorney David Chun, no relation to Admiral Chun, despite the shared surname, laid out the basic facts of the case with clinical precision. He described Sarah's elaborate deception, the false documentation she had created, and the positions and income she had obtained through fraudulent means. Your Honor, the defendant's scheme was sophisticated and sustained over multiple years. She created false military records, fabricated service decorations, and used this fraudulent identity to obtain lucrative consulting contracts and speaking engagements. The total amount of money she received through these fraudulent means exceeds $400,000. Sarah's court-appointed attorney, a young public defender named Rachel Martinez, argued for Sarah's release on bond, emphasizing her lack of prior criminal history, her ties to the community through her daughter, and her voluntary confession that had led to the charges. Your Honor, Ms. Collins came forward voluntarily to admit her deception. She has been fully cooperative with investigators and has already begun the process of making restitution to the organization she defrauded. She poses no flight risk and is committed to taking responsibility for her actions. Judge Hernandez set bond at $50,000, an amount that Sarah couldn't afford but that Admiral Chun had quietly arranged to have posted through a Veterans Assistance Fund. Sarah learned about this unexpected help when Rachel Martinez informed her that her bond had been paid by an anonymous benefactor. Walking out of the courthouse that afternoon, Sarah felt disoriented by the sudden transition from federal custody back to the normal world. Cars were driving past, people were walking to work, and life was continuing as usual, while her own world had been completely upended. Rachel Martinez walked with Sarah to a nearby coffee shop to discuss the case and Sarah's options. The young attorney was thorough and compassionate, but she didn't sugarcoat the seriousness of Sarah's situation. The charges you're facing carry significant potential prison time. Mail fraud and wire fraud each carry maximum sentences of 20 years, though you obviously wouldn't receive anything close to that for a first offense with your circumstances. More realistically, you're looking at potentially 2 to 5 years in federal prison, depending on how the case proceeds. Sarah absorbed this information numbly. What are my options? The prosecutor has indicated they're willing to consider a plea agreement, especially given your cooperation and voluntary confession. They're interested in understanding your motivations and the scope of your actual advocacy work. There's also the possibility of a cooperation agreement if you can provide information about any other fraudulent activity in the Veterans Services community. I don't know of any other fraud, Sarah said. My case is unique as far as I know. That's probably true, but prosecutors like to explore all possibilities. The other factor working in your favor is the intervention of Admiral Chun. He's apparently been making calls on your behalf, emphasizing the legitimate good work you did and arguing for alternatives to traditional prosecution. Rachel explained that Admiral Chun had contacted the prosecutor's office and provided detailed information about Sarah's actual contributions to veteran advocacy, including specific examples of veterans she had helped and programs she had improved. He had also arranged for several legitimate military officers to vouch for the value of her work, despite the fraudulent means by which she had obtained her positions. There's something called a Veterans Treatment Court that might be an option, Rachel continued. It's designed for veterans who commit crimes related to service-connected issues like PTSD, substance abuse, or adjustment problems. Your case is unusual because you weren't dealing with typical veteran readjustment issues, but the underlying financial stress and desire to help other veterans might qualify you for alternative sentencing. Over the next several days, Sarah found herself living in a strange liminal space between her old life and whatever came next. She couldn't work in the Veterans Services community while facing fraud charges, but she also couldn't completely disappear from the mess she had created. Organizations continued to call with questions about programs she had been involved with, and investigators needed her help understanding the scope of her activities. The media attention was intense, but brief. Several news outlets picked up the story of the fake SEAL commander, but without Sarah granting interviews, the coverage focused mainly on the basic facts of her deception and arrest. The veteran community's response was mixed. Some expressed outrage at her violations of military honor, while others showed surprising sympathy for her circumstances and acknowledged the positive work she had done. Emma was struggling with the sudden changes in their routine and the confused explanations from adults about why Mommy had to go to court and why they couldn't afford their usual activities. Mrs. Patterson had been wonderfully supportive, but Sarah could see that her daughter was scared and confused by the upheaval in their lives. "Mommy, are you going to jail?" Emma asked one evening as Sarah was tucking her into bed. "I might have to go away for a while," Sarah answered honestly. "I made some serious mistakes, and sometimes when adults make mistakes, they have to face consequences. But no matter what happens, I love you, and we'll figure out how to take care of you. I don't want you to go away. I don't want to go away either, sweetheart. I'm working with lawyers and other people to try to find a solution that keeps us together as much as possible." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks after Sarah's arrest. During that time, She met several times with Rachel Martinez to prepare her case and explore possible plea agreements. She also met with a federal probation officer who was conducting a pre-sentence investigation, examining Sarah's background, motivations, and potential for rehabilitation. The probation officer, a veteran himself named John Walsh, was particularly interested in understanding how Sarah had justified her deception to herself and what had finally motivated her to confess. "Miss Collins, help me understand the progression of your thinking. How did you go from making a small misstatement in a job interview to creating an elaborate false identity as a SEAL commander?" Sarah had thought about this question constantly since her arrest. "It was incremental, Mr. Walsh. Each step seemed like a small addition to what I had already done, and the opportunities it created seemed to justify the deception. The work I was doing was genuinely helpful, and I convinced myself that the positive outcomes outweighed the dishonesty of my methods." "What finally made you decide to come clean?" "Admiral Chun confronted me with evidence of my deception, but, honestly, I think I was ready to be caught. The stress of maintaining the lie was becoming overwhelming, and I was starting to make mistakes that would have exposed me eventually. In a strange way, it was a relief to finally tell the truth." John Walsh's report would be crucial in determining Sarah's sentence, and she could tell he was trying to understand whether she was genuinely remorseful or simply sorry she had been caught. During the second week after her arrest, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Dr. Patricia Wells, the psychologist who had originally become suspicious of her credentials. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling. I've been thinking about you since this all came to light, and I wanted you to know that several of us in the veteran services community have been discussing your situation. Dr. Wells, I can't tell you how sorry I am about deceiving you and everyone else. I know the damage this has caused to trust in the community. You should be sorry, and there has been damage. But there's also been an interesting conversation about the legitimate work you did and how we might learn from this situation. Some of us are exploring the possibility of creating a new position focused specifically on helping veterans who are struggling with financial stress and making poor decisions." Sarah was surprised by this unexpected development. "I don't understand. Why would anyone want to work with me after what I've done?" "Because you understand something that many of us don't. You know what it's like to be desperate, to feel trapped by circumstances, to make choices you know are wrong because they seem like the only options available. Those are real issues that affect veterans, and we need people who understand them from personal experience." Dr. Wells explained that a coalition of veteran service organizations was discussing the possibility of advocating for alternative sentencing in Sarah's case, potentially involving community service and restitution rather than prison time. The work would be legitimate and supervised, but it would allow Sarah to continue contributing to veteran advocacy while making amends for her deception. "This isn't charity, Sarah. This is recognizing that your situation, while inexcusable, has highlighted real gaps in our support systems for veterans facing financial and personal crises. We think there's value in having someone who truly understands those challenges working to address them." The call ended with Dr. Wells promising to keep Sarah informed about these discussions, but warning her not to count on anything until the legal process was complete. Still, for the first time since her arrest, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope that her future might involve more than just punishment for her past mistakes. As the date for her preliminary hearing approached, Sarah found herself caught between anxiety about the legal consequences she faced and gratitude for the unexpected support she was receiving from some members of the community she had deceived. Her case had become more complex than a simple fraud prosecution, evolving into a broader discussion about veteran support systems and the circumstances that drive people to desperate measures. The question now was whether a federal judge would be willing to consider these alternative perspectives, or whether Sarah would face the full weight of traditional criminal justice for her elaborate deception. Either way, she was determined to face whatever came next with the honesty that had been missing from her life for the past 3 years. The federal courthouse was more crowded than usual on the morning of Sarah's sentencing hearing, 6 months after her arrest. The case had drawn attention from veteran advocacy groups, military organizations, and media outlets interested in the unusual circumstances surrounding her fraud and the community response to it. Sarah sat at the defendant's table wearing a simple navy blue dress, her hands folded in her lap as she watched the gallery fill with faces both familiar and unknown. Admiral Chin sat in the front row, having flown in from Washington, D.C. specifically for the hearing. Dr. Patricia Wells was there, along with several other members of the veteran services community who who had worked with Sarah during her years as Commander Martinez. Surprisingly, even Tom Harrison from the VA regional office was present, despite the damage her deception had caused to his organization. The months since Sarah's arrest had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, community meetings, and personal reflection. She had pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for a cooperation agreement and the prosecution's recommendation for a reduced sentence. The government had acknowledged her voluntary confession, her full cooperation with investigations, and the unique circumstances that had led to her crimes. More importantly, the Veteran Services community had rallied around an unprecedented proposal for Sarah's sentencing. Led by Admiral Chun and Dr. Wells, a coalition of organizations had petitioned the court to consider alternative sentencing that would allow Sarah to make restitution through supervised community service rather than traditional incarceration. Rachel Martinez had worked tirelessly to prepare for this moment, gathering testimony from dozens of veterans who had been helped by Sarah's advocacy work, documentation of programs she had improved, and expert analysis of the financial desperation that had motivated her initial deception. The case had evolved into something much more complex than a typical fraud prosecution. Judge Hernandez called the court to order and began by acknowledging the unusual nature of the case and the extensive documentation that had been submitted by both sides. This court has reviewed hundreds of pages of testimony, letters, and expert analysis regarding Ms. Collins' case. I want to begin by stating clearly that military impersonation and fraud are serious crimes that this court takes very seriously. The defendant's actions violated the trust of numerous organizations and individuals and dishonored the service of legitimate military personnel. Sarah felt her stomach drop as the judge continued with what seemed like a prelude to significant prison time. However, Judge Hernandez continued, this case also presents unique circumstances that require careful consideration of both punishment and rehabilitation. Ms. Collins' crimes were motivated not by greed or malice, but by financial desperation and a genuine, if misguided, desire to help fellow veterans. The court has also been presented with extensive evidence of the legitimate good work she accomplished during her period of deception. The prosecutor, David Chun, rose to present the government's sentencing recommendation. Despite the serious nature of the charges, his tone was measured rather than vindictive. Your Honor, the United States acknowledges that this case is unusual in several respects. Ms. Collins' voluntary confession, her complete cooperation with our investigation, and the testimony we've received about her legitimate advocacy work are all factors that support a departure from standard sentencing guidelines. The government recommends a sentence of 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release with community service requirements. When Rachel Martinez stood to present the defense's argument, the courtroom grew quiet. She had spent months building a case not just for leniency, but for a fundamentally different approach to Sarah's punishment. Your Honor, the defense respectfully submits that this case represents an opportunity for restorative rather than purely punitive justice. Ms. Collins' crimes, while serious, were born from circumstances that affect many veterans and their families. Rather than simply punishing her, we propose a sentence that allows her to make meaningful restitution while addressing the systemic issues that contributed to her desperate situation. Rachel outlined the alternative sentencing proposal that had been developed by the Veteran Services Coalition. Sarah would serve 6 months in federal prison, followed by 4 years of supervised release during which she would work full-time for a new program specifically designed to help veterans facing financial crises and adjustment problems. Her salary would be garnished to provide restitution to the organizations she had defrauded, and her work would be supervised by Admiral Chun and other respected members of the veteran community. Your Honor, this approach serves the interests of justice while recognizing that Ms. Collins has unique insights and experiences that can benefit other veterans. Rather than simply removing her from society, we propose channeling her knowledge and passion into legitimate advocacy work that addresses the root causes that led to her criminal behavior. Judge Hernandez then invited impact statements from victims of Sarah's fraud. Tom Harrison spoke first, describing the damage to his organization's credibility and the resources they had spent addressing the fallout from her deception. Your Honor, what Ms. Collins did was wrong, and it has had real consequences for our ability to serve veterans effectively. However, I also want the court to know that during her time working with us, she genuinely helped hundreds of veterans access services and resources. Her methods were fraudulent, but her impact was often positive. We support the alternative sentencing proposal because we believe it serves justice while allowing her to continue contributing to the community she deceived. Dr. Wells spoke about the broader implications of the case for the veteran services community, emphasizing how Sarah's situation had highlighted gaps in support systems for veterans and their families facing financial crises. Your Honor, this case has forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about how we serve veterans. Ms. Collins' desperation led her to commit fraud, but it also drove her to become one of the most effective advocates I've ever worked with. We believe there's value in learning from her experience rather than simply punishing her for it. The most emotional testimony came from Admiral Chun, who had been instrumental in both exposing Sarah's fraud and advocating for alternative sentencing. Your Honor, I've served in the Navy for over 40 years, and I understand better than most the gravity of what Ms. Collins did in dishonoring military service. But I also understand something about second chances and the importance of taking care of our fellow service members and their families. Ms. Collins made terrible decisions, but they were born from desperation, not malice. She has unique insights into the challenges facing veterans, and I believe those insights can be valuable if channeled properly. Admiral Chun went on to describe specific instances where Sarah's advocacy had helped struggling veterans, including a former Marine who had been contemplating suicide before Sarah connected him with mental health resources, and a Navy veteran who had been homeless before Sarah helped her navigate the VA benefits system. Your Honor, I'm not asking the court to ignore Ms. Collins' crimes. I'm asking the court to consider a punishment that serves justice while recognizing her potential to continue serving the veteran community in a legitimate capacity. When Judge Hernandez asked if Sarah wished to address the court before sentencing, she stood on unsteady legs, having prepared and revised her statement dozens of times over the past weeks. Your Honor, I want to begin by acknowledging that what I did was wrong. I violated the trust of dozens of organizations and hundreds of individuals. I dishonored the service of legitimate military personnel, and I caused real harm to programs that serve veterans. There is no excuse for my actions, and I take full responsibility for the choices I made. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued. I also want the court to understand that my work in the veteran community, despite being built on false pretenses, was genuine in its intent and often positive in its impact. I know what it's like to be desperate, to feel trapped by circumstances, to make poor decisions because they seem like the only options available. These experiences, while they led me to commit fraud, also gave me insights into the challenges facing many veterans and their families. She concluded by expressing her commitment to making amends through whatever means the court deemed appropriate, whether through traditional incarceration or the alternative sentencing program that had been proposed. Judge Hernandez took a brief recess to review the extensive documentation one final time before returning to announce her decision. The courtroom was silent as she began to speak. Ms. Collins, the court finds that your crimes were serious and cannot be excused by the circumstances that motivated them. Military impersonation strikes at the heart of the honor and sacrifice that defines our armed forces, and fraud undermines the trust that is essential to our society. Sarah felt her heart sinking as the judge continued. However, the court also finds that this case presents unique circumstances that justify a departure from standard sentencing guidelines. Your voluntary confession, complete cooperation with authorities, and the extensive testimony regarding your legitimate advocacy work all support alternative sentencing. Judge Hernandez announced that she was accepting the coalition's proposal with modifications. Sarah would serve 4 months in federal minimum security prison, followed by 4 years of supervised release. During her supervised release, she would work full-time for a new veteran crisis intervention program, with her salary garnished at 50% to provide restitution to the organizations she had defrauded. Ms. Collins, you will be supervised by a board including Admiral Chun, Dr. Wells, and other members of the veteran services community. Your work will focus specifically on helping veterans who are facing the kind of financial and personal crises that led to your own poor decisions. This sentence serves both punitive and restorative purposes, holding you accountable while channeling your experience toward helping others avoid similar mistakes. The judge also imposed strict conditions on Sarah's supervised release, including regular psychological counseling, financial monitoring, and prohibition from representing herself as anything other than a former logistics specialist who had been convicted of military impersonation. As the gavel came down and the hearing concluded, Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions. 4 months in prison would be difficult, especially being separated from Emma, But the alternative program offered hope for rebuilding her life in a meaningful way. More importantly, the judge's decision acknowledged both the harm she had caused and the potential value of her experience in helping other veterans. Emma had been staying with Mrs. Patterson during the legal proceedings, and Sarah would have 1 week to spend with her daughter before reporting to prison. As they walked out of the courthouse together, Admiral Chun approached Sarah and her attorney. Ms. Collins, I want you to understand that this opportunity comes with enormous responsibility. The veteran community is giving you a chance to earn redemption, but that chance can be revoked if you don't live up to the trust we're placing in you. I understand, Admiral. I won't let you down again. See that you don't. But also understand that we believe in second chances for people who earn them. You have the opportunity to turn your mistakes into something valuable for other veterans. Don't waste it. The week before reporting to prison was bittersweet. Sarah spent every moment she could with Emma, trying to explain in age-appropriate terms why Mommy would be going away for a few months and who would take care of her during that time. Mrs. Patterson had agreed to serve as Emma's guardian, with support from several other families in their community who had rallied around them during the difficult months since Sarah's arrest. Mommy, when you come back, will we be able to live together again? Emma asked as Sarah tucked her into bed on their last night together. Yes, sweetheart. When I come back, I'll have a new job helping other veterans, and we'll start building our life again. It might be different from before, but we'll be together, and we'll be honest about who we are and what we've been through. I'm proud of you for telling the truth, Mommy, even though it got you in trouble. Sarah held her daughter close, marveling at the 8-year-old's wisdom and resilience. Thank you, baby. That means everything to me. For months later, Sarah walked out of the federal minimum security facility in Dublin, California, to find Admiral Chun waiting in the parking lot. The months in prison had been challenging but transformative, giving her time to reflect on her choices and develop a clearer understanding of how she wanted to move forward. Ready to get to work, Miss Collins? Admiral Chun asked as they drove toward the airport for her flight back to San Diego. Yes, sir. I'm ready. The new position involved working with veterans who were facing financial crises, homelessness, mental health challenges, and other issues that could lead to desperate decisions. Sarah's official title was Crisis Intervention Specialist, and her criminal history was disclosed to everyone she worked with. Rather than being a liability, her experience with fraud and financial desperation became a valuable tool for connecting with veterans.